Would you join me in prayer this morning? Loving God, once again open our hearts and minds to hear these words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. May the words of my mouth and meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I've had the beatitude, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, on my mind this week. Megan and I spent Monday and Tuesday in Williamsburg, Virginia for a family funeral. Her sister Heather and Heather's husband Nelson live just outside of Philadelphia with their two children. And a week ago Friday, on February the 21st, they got a dreaded phone call that Nelson's mother had taken her own life. So we flew up to Virginia Monday to go to the service and to be there with the family. Now, for those of you who know me, then you know that I'm not a stranger to that subject. I lost my mother the same way almost 9 years ago in 2005. So, ironically, Megan and her sister, both married guys who lost their mothers to mental illness. And they have had to deal with that as a family. When somebody decides to take their own life, it usually means that they are very ill, that they have reached a point where they see no hope. They often feel like they are a burden on everybody else. But the most tragic part is that their pain gets shifted to the other members of the family. And there is a lot of guilt and a lot of regret and a lot of hurt and a lot of questions that go left unanswered. So I want to begin the sermon this morning by saying this. If you are struggling with depression, if you feel like there is no hope in your life, if you feel like you are alone and you're having to shoulder all of your burdens all by yourself, you don't. There's help available. There are people who care and who are ready to listen. There are ministers, and there are Stephen ministers, and there are counselors that are here to help. Part of being a church, being a community of faith, means that we don't have to struggle through life by ourselves. We are here for each other. We love each other. We support each other. And we cannot be afraid to share with each other our burdens and our troubles. I found comfort this week in that beatitude, the words of Jesus. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Somebody once said that life, after all, is fair because everybody gets their hearts broken. But thank goodness we have God's strength and God's hope, and we have each other to get us through those difficult times of life. Today, we are continuing our Sermon on the Mount series, and I'm going to preach on a subject that I have never preached on before, and that is the subject of lust. How's that for a transition from the beginning of the sermon? Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery,' but I say to you, anyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart." To which we might respond, Jesus, are you kidding me? He's already told us to not get angry. Last week, Roy talked about what it means to love your enemies, to not retaliate, to turn the other cheek. And now Jesus is saying, if you look at somebody with lust, you have already committed adultery in your heart. Could these teachings be any more difficult? Many of you are familiar with a girl that grew up in this town with the TV stage name of Hannah Montana. And Hannah Montana had a TV show that was very popular among children. For many years, she was cute, she was dynamic, entertaining, she was a good singer. But this past year, 2013, little Hannah Montana grew up. And we got a full dose of Miley Cyrus. Everybody was made aware of Miley's performance last August at the MTV Music Video Awards. It was certainly a calculated move on her part. She took a page out of Madonna's playbook, and it seemed to have worked for her. She accomplished what she set out to accomplish, and her performance was shown over and over again on just about every single news station. And even those who were mortified over what she did still watched the news play those clips over and over again. The term twerking was added to the English vocabulary, and now all the rap artists want to have Miley in their music videos, and why wouldn't they? Miley remained the #1 news story for a number of weeks last summer, despite the fact that there were far more important things going on in our nation and in our world, such as the crisis in Syria. Why is that? Sex sells in our culture. We are a culture absolutely obsessed with sexuality and sexual expression. And as the digital age progresses, this becomes more and more the case. Internet pornography is on the rise. It has become a huge problem today for many people. Some will say, who can blame us? God has given us a sex drive, and there is absolutely nothing that we can do about it. Marilyn Monroe once said, sex is a part of nature, and I go along with nature. But for parents, this overtly sexual expression that is constantly in our face makes raising children, and especially teenagers, and instilling values into them, it makes it very challenging and difficult, yet I would say it's more necessary than ever before. It serves us well to take a minute and to ponder what the real issues are here that underlie the surface of our culture's obsession with sex. A longing for intimacy, self-confidence, or a lack of self-confidence, body image, power, control, loneliness, affirmation, acceptance, and lust. These are the deep issues at hand that so often don't get addressed. These are the issues that need to be addressed, they need to be talked about, and they need to be dealt with. There was another story that dominated the news this past year here in Nashville, and it had to do with 4 Vanderbilt football players and an incident that took place last summer in one of the dormitories. And this situation is still playing out in court, and we read about it in the papers, and we see it on the news all the time. But I cannot help but wonder about the link between our culture's obsession with sex and this type of incident. What can we do to teach our kids that sex is not something to be exploited or forced or bought or sold? Sex is the way that 2 consenting adults express their love for each other in an intimate setting. Before coming to Woodmont, I used to travel and speak on college campuses. Most of the time it was fraternity and sorority events at different campuses in the Southeast. And one of the things that I would tell the college kids is that if they decided to go to bed with somebody, they should be open to the possibility of spending the rest of their lives with that person as a co-parent. They should be aware of the possibility that a child might be conceived. And you should have seen some of the looks that I got from those students when I would say that. They hadn't really thought about it. Many people don't want to take responsibility for their actions. John Barrymore once said that sex is the thing that takes up the least amount of time, but it causes the most amount of trouble. Our culture continues to move away from viewing sex as an expression of intimacy and love to one where sex is glorified and objectified, used and abused. And as a result, sex loses its luster in marriages and in committed relationships, and this very well may be contributing to our high levels of divorce rates and the rising restlessness within marriage. We simply don't understand what sex is and when it's appropriate. And I think that it's imperative that parents talk to their kids at some point about sex, what it is and what it isn't. And my advice for parents is don't wait too long to have that conversation. The age will be different for every child and for every family. And sure, it's an awkward conversation that I think the parents are just as uncomfortable as the children when it gets brought up. But if you don't have that conversation, then the culture will. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, beware of lust. Adultery starts with lust. You remember the story in the Old Testament of David and Bathsheba, found in 2 Samuel. King David is on the roof of his palace when he looks across and he sees a beautiful woman named Bathsheba who is bathing on the roof. And so he sends for her, and they sleep together, and Bathsheba conceives. And if you continue reading the passage, you find that David's affair with Bathsheba is only the beginning. Because once he finds out that Bathsheba is pregnant, he then wants to find out who her husband is, Uriah the Hittite. And he has Uriah put on the front lines of battle so that he is killed. So then David can marry Bathsheba. So in this situation in the Old Testament, lust leads to adultery, which leads to an unplanned pregnancy, which then leads to murder. But it all started with lust. And Jesus says, beware of lust. In his book, The Sermon on the Mount, Emmett Fox says, in this unforgettable paragraph, Jesus stresses the master truth. What really matters is thought. He says an outward act is but the sequel to a thought. And the type of thought which we allow to become habitual will sooner or later find expression on the plane of action. Thoughts matter. In his commentary on these verses, William Barclay makes an interesting distinction. He says Jesus is not speaking of the natural, normal desire, which is part of human instinct and human nature. According to the literal meaning of the Greek, the man who is condemned is the man who looks at a woman with the deliberate intention of lusting after her. The man who is condemned is the man who deliberately uses his eyes to awaken his lust. The man who looks in such a way that passion is awakened and desire deliberately stimulated. So Barclay is saying, of course, we will notice if somebody is attractive. But what we cannot do is send messages, either verbal or nonverbal, that are inappropriate and can lead us into a compromising position or situation. But still, Jesus takes it a step further. He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Now, this is clearly hyperbole, right? If we took these words literally, we would all be walking around with no eyes and no hands. But Jesus is saying, pay attention to the situations and the circumstances that cause you to stray, and don't put yourself in those situations. If you have problems when you drink, then don't drink so much. If you have problems when you're around certain people, then stop hanging out with them. If you run with people that don't think twice about cheating on their spouse, then don't run with those people anymore. Be careful of the company that you keep. Adultery is a real problem in our culture. In order for there to be a healthy marriage or a healthy relationship, there has to be trust. And trust is built over time. And adultery flies in the face of trust. It tears it apart. It shakes the foundation. Trust has to be built, and then it has to be sustained. But the church has a difficult role here. Because while we believe that adultery is wrong, and it tears marriages and families apart, and it causes a lot of hurt and a lot of pain, we are also called to help people put their lives back together if adultery happens. Marriages can be salvaged. I see it happen all the time. Although there is a lot of pain and there are feelings of betrayal and there's a lot of hurt, there can be forgiveness and there can be a new beginning. It's important to remember that. What did Jesus say about the woman who had been caught in adultery? The religious people wanted to stone her, to kill her, because that's what the law said you were supposed to do. But Jesus said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." Everybody had to drop their rocks at that point. And Jesus said to her, "Not what you did is okay, but go and sin no more." You may remember what happened to former Tennessee Titan quarterback Steve McNair about 5 years ago, how his life came to a tragic end back in the summer of 2009. I remember watching that funeral on TV. It was televised, and a number of people got up to speak. There was Eddie George, who was his teammate. There was Derek Mason, who was his teammate. They got up and shared thoughts about their friend and former teammate. And then Bishop Walker, the pastor of Mount Zion, got up and delivered a really powerful eulogy. And Bishop Walker can preach. He brings it. But he articulated what everybody in that room was thinking. He said, "I'm going to address the big elephant in the room. This hero, this sports legend, this great philanthropist, this role model, this famous son of Nashville was killed as the result of an affair that he was having with a 20-year-old woman, leaving behind a wife, 4 sons, many friends, and millions of fans." Bishop Walker related the situation to that story in the New Testament where Jesus encounters the woman who had been caught in adultery. He talked about how the religious leaders were saying that she should be killed, stoned for her actions. But Jesus said, "Let those who are without sin cast the first stone." And so Bishop Walker said that he had come to declare a stone-dropping service. He said, "Next time you want to write about Steve McNair, drop your stone. Next time you text somebody about it, drop your stone. Next time you want to tweet about it, drop your stone." What Steve McNair was doing in his personal life was not right. It was wrong. It was irresponsible. It disappointed many people, and it ultimately ended his life. But I do think that it's time for many people in our society and many inside of the church to drop their stones and to start practicing forgiveness. We all sin. We all do things that we're ashamed of. But we all need forgiveness. We all need new beginnings. And Christ offers that to us, and so we should also offer that to others. Lust is a problem in our culture. Lust can be dangerous. Lust is not love, and it can lead us down the wrong path. What we have to do is acknowledge it for what it is and make sure that it doesn't lead to actions that we will later regret. Again, I want to leave you this morning with a quote by Henry Nouwen that I shared when I preached on anger a few weeks back. Here's what Nowen says. How do we befriend our inner enemies, lust and anger? By listening to what they are saying. They say, I have some unfulfilled needs, and who really loves me? Instead of pushing our lust and anger away as unwelcome guests, we can recognize that our anxious, driven hearts need some healing. Our restlessness calls for us to look for the true inner rest, where lust and anger can be converted into a deeper way of loving. There's a lot of unruly energy in lust and anger. But when that energy can be directed towards loving well, we can transform not only ourselves, but even those who might otherwise become the victims of anger and lust. This takes patience, but it's possible.